Alright, guys, what's up? It's the Ascension of Babylon. What we do here is we talk about the occult, we talk about spiritual self-development, and we talk about the healing process. And what we're going to be talking about today is extraterrestrial versions of us from the future. And I'm probably going to refer to these extraterrestrial versions of us as interdimensional versions of us. So when I say interdimensional versions of us, I'm speaking about versions of us that from our perspective of time would be existing in a future timeline. And these are beings that no longer have the need to have a physical body in the same way that we do. These are beings existing in what we would consider as humans to be higher dimensions where, there isn't physicality like there is here on Earth or in, other physical dimensional planes. So with that context being drawn, I believe that most of us, if not all of us, have these interdimensional versions of ourselves that are existing in the future. And I've contacted these versions of myself. I've interacted with them in different ways, both telepathically and through other ways of communication as well. And this video is inspired by a really interesting experience that I had today. And I may get into that in this video. I'm likely to get into it, but if it just doesn't flow that way and I don't want you to be like, hey, you said you're gonna, mention this experience and you didn't. But I'm likely to speak on this experience. So I would say for some time now, I've been making different levels of contact with these interdimensional versions of me from the future. And I actually think that this is an explanation for a lot of the abduction cases that have taken place or that we know about. I think a lot of people, when they're making these claims of being abducted and they're speaking on these different experiences that they have had, I think a lot of people are actually telling the truth. Now, I know there's plenty of people that probably do lie and things of that nature, but I do believe that alien abduction is a phenomena that has taken place when we're looking at a majority of the more serious reports that are available for us to take a look at. There are some really cool stories about things that happen to people, and I also have things that have happened to me as well. There's times where I've actually seen tall humanoid figures in my environment. They're more ghost-like, or I think a better word is etheric, meaning I can tell they're not physical, but I could see that something seemed to be there. The mother of my child has also claimed to see what I saw in my home as well. There are also times where I've had dreams where I'll be on a spaceship. So one specific dream that I had, I was on this spaceship and I was actually using some cloak of invisibility to try to sneak around and snoop around and look around or something like that. And I guess these beings caught me because the next thing I remember dreaming about in that same dream is these beings seemingly tattooing something or drilling something into my back. And it didn't hurt, it just kind of felt like a tattoo gun or something like that. And when I woke up from this dream, I actually, for a couple of moments, felt the vibration that I was actually feeling inside of the dreaming state. There are other very clear lucid dreaming experiences that I've had to where I'm in this dark kind of foggy like space and these very tall humanoid alien looking beings will be surrounding me. There's times where I've done occult rituals right here in this room. Behind this camera is a big mirror, and I've actually had these, or what seem to be these humanoid, darker looking alien figures show up in the mirror. And then there's other experiences I've had, but I have so many experiences when it comes to, spirits and extraterrestrials, interdimensional beings and stuff like that, that if I don't write it down, it's easy for me to forget. And I know that sounds crazy, but I joke around a lot, and I tell people that my life is like the X-Files, and if you don't know what the X-Files is, it's like every episode there's something supernatural happening. Well, at times in my life it can certainly feel like that for sure. So that's why I joke around with people, and I say that my life is kind of like the X-Files. So the point is, if I don't write these things down, I'm not always going to remember them off the top of my head. But the point is as well, I've had a lot of these kinds of experiences. So going back to like alien abductions and stuff like that, I do believe that in a lot of these cases it's actually future versions of that person going back in time to have some type of interaction with that person that's meant to have an evolutionary effect on that person, the rest of our species, and is meant to like somehow benefit the alien, whether it's a gray or it's another type of alien or whatever that being may potentially be. So I think when some people get abducted, these are actually future versions of that person. Versions of that person that are existing in different timelines that are going back into their past to change what is taking place, in their present moment timeline, which we would consider to be our future. Now, I'm not saying that's always what it is, but I do think that a lot of the abduction cases may definitely be versions of those people from the future. So I've certainly had my fair share of interactions with extraterrestrial beings and interdimensional beings, and these interdimensional versions of us are all a part of our higher self. Now, if you don't know what the higher self is the totality of our evolutionary experiences and the totality of our, we can say, sentience or even intelligence, a totality that's comprised of all of these different versions of us. So that will be parallel versions of our human self, interdimensional versions of us that have exceeded the need to have a physical body, and, moving up in dimensional frequency all the way until we come to the totality, which is known as the higher self. You can almost imagine all of the versions of us that are existing are like the cells that make up the body of energy that we call the higher self. I think that's a really good way to understand all of these different versions of us in relation to the higher self and what the higher self actually is. The higher self is the higher intelligence that is the most evolved version of all of the other versions of it that make up its body of energy, which is existing on a spectrum comprised of different dimensions. And there's different ways that people have understood how these dimensions operate. There's some people that believe in 12 dimensions. Some people use the term density. So for instance, when you look at something like the law of one, they speak about different densities all the way from 1 to 7, and they say the higher self is existing in the 6th density, getting ready to transition into the 7th, and so on. So there's different ways that people have understood this spectrum that all of these different selves are existing on, in the spectrum that our higher self experiences itself on. Every single version of us is just a, we can say, less evolved version of the higher self. The higher self is a future version of us, but it's the most evolved version of us that is existing in our universe, or we can even say our multiverse of light. And all multiverse or universe of light means, it has nothing to do with good or anything like that. Light is just simply form and is associated with the structuring and ordering principles of the cosmos. So at the pinnacle of our evolutionary process exists our higher self. And our higher self is, we can say, governed by these structuring and ordering principles. And once again, our higher self is this body of energy that is comprised of all of these different other versions of it that are just less evolved in relation to the greater intelligence that it carries on an overall level. So I say all of that to say that it's actually beneficial to interact with these interdimensional versions of yourself, because they carry a higher level of intelligence and a higher level of sentience that you're actually able, or let me say, then you're able to access in the physical experience, because there's certain limitations in relation to the physical experience. And even though those versions of you are all you, there's certain limiting factors that are like these evolutionary principles that we experience as a human being. So in many ways of looking at it, we can actually expand our ability to tap in to these higher bodies of energy that we possess by interacting with these interdimensional versions of us. We can even say there's a DNA upgrading process that can take place as we're interacting with these interdimensional versions of us that from our perspective of time are actually existing in the future. We can change how we experience the present moment by interacting with these interdimensional versions of us, and we can shift ourselves into a reality where maybe we go from, living a life that's not truly authentic to who we are, to walking, a higher evolutionary path, or existing in a timeline where we're actually fulfilling our purpose in the truest way that that purpose can actually be fulfilled. So with all of that being said, now I'm going to tell you about the experience that I had today, but I have to start with my experience last night. So last night I was astral projecting my consciousness to these different interdimensional future versions of myself. I was projecting my awareness to them to start a conscious interaction with them. And I ended up going to sleep. So today, a couple of hours after waking up, I get dizzy out of nowhere. I feel dizzy enough to where it kind of alarmed me. And then my vision started to get blurry, and I started to see all of these, like, we can say colors kind of manifesting around me, and what seemed to be like these waves of energy. And even though, because it was out of nowhere, it was kind of scary. So mind you, it's like gravity shifting on me. I'm feeling pretty lightheaded and dizzy. And now I'm seeing all of these colors. There was a part of me wondering, like, am I having a medical problem or something like that? But most of me understood that I'm actually having an evolutionary experience with these interdimensional versions of me, and I could see, almost like on a sliding screen, if that makes sense, in my mind's eye, these different interdimensional versions of me. And when I was experiencing a little bit of fear, a voice actually entered my mind and said, it's okay, we're guiding you through this process. You don't have anything to be afraid of. A very calm, kind of loving, we can almost say like compassionate voice is what entered my mind. And even though my body was a little bit alarmed because this came out of nowhere, there was still this undertone of, I'm going through what I need to go through, and there's nothing that I need to worry about. I am protected, and I am safe to have this experience. And, it came with like a headache. Afterwards, my ears were ringing and stuff like that. But eventually I came down from this experience. The closest thing I can compare it to is taking a low dose of mushrooms, right? It's almost like I took a low dose of mushrooms. When you start having like the mild visual experiences and things might seem a bit blurry and you feel a little different in the body, that's what this experience was comparable to. So, I say all of this to say that I believe that most of us, if not all of us, have these interdimensional versions of us that are willing to interact with us if we have the capacity to interact with them. Of course, they're going to honor free will. And, there's going to be people that just aren't ready to kind of go through the energetic shifts that come from interacting with these interdimensional versions of us in a more direct way. Like, for instance, somebody like me experiences through interacting with these beings. But, many of you may actually be ready to have these kinds of experiences. This is what I wanted to share with you today. I believe that realizing that we do have these interdimensional versions of us is a part of our evolutionary process as human beings, and is a part of us moving into a higher level of consciousness as a species in general. So, yeah, I think I'm going to leave the video right here. This is short, sweet, and right to the point, I think. And I will be making much more content about interdimensional versions of ourselves and things of that nature. But until then, I will see you in the next video.